Hello, AP World History. The purpose of this video is to give us an overview of ancient China. Okay, to put it in the grand scheme of things, what we've learned so far. um, well, first off, after Mesopotamia, after Egypt, and after the Indus River Valley, historians consider China to be the fourth civilization that rose in antiquity. And it centered around the Yellow River, which we notice is a very, very long river in China. It's second to the Yangtze River in terms of length. And one of the key elements of the Yellow River that made it so conducive to living was that the river itself, hence the name, does appear yellow in form. It's rich in sediment, right? When it is flowing through these very tall mountain ranges, it picks up sediment as it goes. Now this sediment is called loess, Loess, and basically when it deposits itself in different parts of the riverbank, it makes the soil rather very fertile. And one of the most well produced, or one of the most frequently produced crops that sustained a very significant amount of life was millet, M-I-L-L-E-T, and millet was a grain that was indigenous to Southeast Asia, right, and East Asia. The other thing about China that makes it stand out is that the Chinese civilization has been consistent. Yes, the dynasties have changed, but there has never been a period of mass exodus or extinction or anything that made the Chinese civilization completely cease to exist. So of course it has evolved over time, but at the end of the day, it is the same continuous civilization. Back to the Yellow River for just a moment. The Yellow River also is associated with some serious loss or strife in China. It has the nickname River of Sorrow because it floods very frequently and it is unpredictable. So even though this flooding can cause massive loss of life and loss of property, it's still just like the Indus River or the Tigris and Euphrates or the Nile. This river is something that the people depend on for life, right? So just as it can flood and kill so many, if it were not for the Yellow River Valley, ancient China would never have evolved the way that it did. The other thing that really distinguishes the Yellow River from so many other parts of the world that we've studied so far, well, first off, the rainfall in China was much more frequent than it was in some of the other places that we've studied so far. So this actually meant that the ancient Chinese civilizations did not have to go about developing really elaborate irrigation projects just because it rained so much. Other things that made China develop the way that it did. First off, China is a very mountainous region, and also there is a very large desert, the Gobi Desert, that separates east from west. So China is very much geographically isolated from the other civilizations that we've studied thus far. Now this does mean that China has limited access to foreign goods in its early history. It's not as significant of a trading empire, at least not with Mesopotamia or Egypt. But it certainly will develop trade networks with other Asian societies or civilizations as they develop. But what makes China unique because of its geographic isolation, this also means that the people were much more homogenous, right? There was not really that sort of melting pot of cultures that we experienced in a place like Mesopotamia. This also means that the Chinese people have developed a really strong national identity. Ultimately, when we trace ourselves through the different Chinese dynasties, the majority of the population of China, at least in the very populous areas of eastern China, most of these people are referred to as Han Chinese. So this kind of shows us how there was not as much, I suppose, racial or national intermixing within China. Okay. So let's look at the Yellow River. Now I wanted to ask a continuity and change question with regard to the Yellow River, because as we study it in this chapter, we know that it was something that before it was tamed, it was, again, really unpredictable. Definitely appears dirty in form because of all the silt that it picks up. But nowadays, the Yellow River has been altered significantly due to modern technology. The Yellow River actually has 14 dams on it now, and there are 2 additional dams that are under construction. The most recently constructed dam I have up here on the upper left, this is called the Laxiwa Dam. It's in Qinghai province, which is really far. It gives us a sense of how far west these different projects are going. So Qinghua province, or Qinghai province rather, is way out in western China. So we're talking, I'm approximating the region, apologies for the inaccuracy, but the most populous regions of China still today are here on the east. So the idea that we have dams that far away from the urban centers of China is really significant. But nonetheless, as you can see in some of these other images of the Yellow River today, it is still very much it's still very much a free-flowing wild river. There are places where the Yellow River floods. The river itself actually frequently will change course because this buildup of silt will stop the river from flowing naturally, and it will have to find a new path, which again has some, as you could imagine, unintended consequences on the geography. And I just wanted to show you this because I just find it so fascinating. So this shows us the Yellow River Delta, so where it actually dumps out into the South China Sea. And as we can see, I know these are recent photos, but we get a sense of what I mean when I say the river changes course. This is the river here, right? So as we can see, as actually this was a man-made diversion of the river, but the river was diverted in between 1995 and 1999, and we see it altering course and actually forming this peninsula of silt deposits. So literally the landscape has changed because of the altering course of the river, and now because of human technology. So just really interesting stuff. Okay, so let's start to think about the civilizations that existed in the earliest periods of China. So China did have Neolithic settlements, just like Mesopotamia, Egypt, the better part of Eurasia had some sort of Neolithic settlements in different parts of, different climate zones that were more conducive to a larger population. So archaeological records start showing that there was a Neolithic population in China in between 5,000 and 3,000 BCE. One of the most well-preserved and also one of the more recent archaeological finds that really shows us what Neolithic China looked like was Banpo village, and this is actually just this is a model, this isn't the excavation, but this gives us a sense of the typical living style that the Neolithic Chinese would have experienced. Essentially a town center with small, either single-family dwellings that normally were circular. They had shelter, they had fire, they had domestication of animals. There was even evidence, archaeological evidence, to suggest that that people lived communally. And to be a little bit more specific about that communal living, another thing that archaeological evidence shows is that the people in Banpo village actually buried their dead in a common place, which definitely shows us some sophistication and also shows us some religious beliefs. Now, this is more common in the Shang Dynasty, which we'll talk about in a moment, but there are some examples of Neolithic. I mean, this here is a representation of an oracle bone. Now, we see very primitive examples of oracle bones that existed in the Neolithic period. This was probably more like Shang, just because of the intricacies of the drawings here. But nonetheless, what we see in Neolithic excavations in China was that there was a use of tools, even if they were not overly sophisticated. We did have some evidence of tools that were made out of bone, for example. There was pottery, and again, communal burial of the dead. So the first dynasty that we're going to talk about is actually one that's a little bit controversial. Now, this sounds strange, but there is very little archaeological evidence that scholars are working with to inform them about the Xia dynasty. And furthermore, up until fairly recently, most world history curricula just straight up ignored the Xia dynasty, and they would begin with the Shang. But the more and more we look at archaeological records, and also the more and more we look at Chinese written traditions, there is a lot of evidence to support the idea that there was a dynasty before the Shang dynasty, and this is the Xia dynasty. So here we are, the dates, sort of late Neolithic, so 2070 BCE to around 1600 BCE. One of the reasons why we start to refer to these periods as dynasties, you most likely know that a dynasty is a ruling family, right? But we characterize the Xia dynasty as one of the first dynasties because there was an actual line of descent. It was clearly a monarchy. One of the most famous kings from the Xia period, at least the one that we know about, was King Yu the Great. And he ruled China in approximately 2200 BCE. One of the things that we know about King Yu was that his leadership helped, first off, kind of diversify labor and make physical improvements to the land. So, for example, the Yellow River actually was dammed in certain places during the Xia dynasty, and this shows us again that there was a pretty strong labor system and that there was some pretty massive manpower involved in that damming project. The other thing that we see in the Xia dynasty is that there was definite either trade or production of metals. Now this is a little bit controversial. So when we say metallurgy, first we're talking about bronze, right? The Bronze Age, this was the material that was available, and this was the material that was expensive that made tools. Now scholars disagree as to whether bronze metallurgy developed independently or whether it was something that the Chinese picked up after trading. So we can sort of play around with which one of these perspectives we believe to be most accurate. There's also tons of evidence of pottery, as I said before, and also some really early examples of oracle bones. Right here, just with the images, this is just one representation, a mythical representation of King Yu the Great. Here we see the approximate location of the Xia dynasty. It's approximate because scholars are still excavating artifacts and trying to date them appropriately. But you can see that it's in eastern China. It's not far from present-day Beijing. So the Yellow River Valley is this area that was most conducive to life. And there still are some really major cities in China here today. So the Xia dynasty gradually collapses. And by around 1700 BCE or so, what we're going to see is that the Shang dynasty is going to eclipse the Xia dynasty. So essentially, a new family is going to be taking over. So I'm going to pick up the next. I'm going to talk about the Xia, or the Shang rather, and Zhou dynasty in the next video. So stay tuned for that one.